CAT 2023, Slot 3, VARC section. Welcome to a very quick analysis and then a detailed analysis will follow in this video. It was a nice CAT, slightly difficult across the sections and across the slots. So this tells us a very important thing that whatever projections you want to make regarding CAT, nothing is going to be as accurate as you think it is going to be. So always be more and more prepared and be more and more confident when you are going to take an exam, because you might find it a bit surprising. When I say the difficulty level was higher this time, and so difficulty level is high for everybody, not just for one student. So eventually, if you are a serious candidate, it is not going to impact as far as the relative performance is concerned. Yes, but of course, if you are not able to tame your mind well, then definitely it might create some problem. Within the section, VARC, for slot 3 especially, I would say RC was on slightly difficult side as compared to the VA section, which was easier. And this tells us an important thing, that reading is of paramount importance. Out of the 4 RCs, 1 RC was moderate level, 1 RC was slightly challenging than moderate level. The other 2 RCs were definitely difficult, either on the side of text that was written in it or on the side of questions, or on both. So unless we are good readers, it would definitely not be possible for us to do well in the VARC section, especially when 66% of the entire section is coming from RC only. A lot of students feel that instead of reading, why should not we solve more RCs? No, it's a skill that you have to build. So if you are an aspirant of CAT 2024 and beyond, you should start reading right away. You should make reading part of your life, diverse reading, complex reading. If you can do it right now, then it is going to be very helpful for you to crack the VARC section. The second observation, which really brought a smile on my face, was the reintroduction of the odd one out questions. Last year, these questions were omitted. These questions were lecture fragments. A lot of students were thinking that maybe odd one out questions will not come again. In fact, as teachers, we were also deliberating on this idea that we should keep odd one out questions as part of our curriculum or not. Thank God we kept it, and we are going to keep it. So this was really interesting that instead of just 3 topics, CAT authorities decided to give 2 questions each on the 4 topics. So one was odd one out, the other was para-jumble, third was summary, and fourth one was sentence completion or para completion. So this tells us this very interesting thing that on the basis of just one exam, don't rely on a CAT trend. Prepare for it well. Anyways, it is a thing of logic, so we can easily do that, because the core skills that are required to solve any of these question types, be it summary, para-jumble, odd one out, are basically the same. With this thing in mind, let's now look at the analysis, the deep analysis, question by question analysis of slot 3 VA, and see on what basis we should be attempting a question, skip a question, and what should be the thought process behind various question types. This was a tricky CAT, so go through this analysis carefully. It is going to help you very well. All the very best. Here is our first passage. Let's look at it and try to understand it. Nice passage, actually. In CAT 23, we saw that RC was slightly on a challenging side as compared to VA, slot 3, when I talk about that. All right, let's begin. Para 1. Understanding romantic aesthetics is not a simple undertaking for reasons that are internal to the nature of the subject. The moment I read the very first line, I realize that the passage might be about romantic aesthetics, and not just romantic aesthetics, understanding romantic aesthetics. Maybe there is limited understanding about this particular topic right now, and it is because of the nature of that subject. When I read this, now let's invoke that same idea of active reading. A couple of questions should come into our mind. What is the very first question? What is romantic aesthetics? What could be the second question? What do we mean by nature of the subject? What is the nature of the subject that is not letting us understand this concept well, right? So maybe author will try to talk about all these things. And then maybe author might also talk about how can we actually understand romantic aesthetics despite the nature of the subject. Let's see. Distinguished scholars such as Lovejoy, Fryer, Berlin have remarked on notorious challenges facing any attempt to define romanticism. Okay. These people have faced a lot of challenge as to how to define romanticism. They all might have tried to define it, but nobody probably was able to do it properly. Again, so far, we don't know what is that nature of subject that is causing them to not fully understand or fully define it. Then author gives an example of this guy called Arthur Lovejoy. Lovejoy, for example, claimed that romanticism is the scandal of literary history and criticism. This is Lovejoy's idea. His interpretation that what is romanticism? It's the scandal of literary history and criticism. The main difficulty in studying the romantics, according to him, is the lack of any single real entity or type of entity that the concept romanticism designates. What is the main difficulty? What is the subject of nature? What is the nature of the subject? It is lack of a single real entity. I don't know what that is, at least till this point in time. I don't know. But author at least has spoken about it, that there is a lack of single real entity which the concept romanticism designate, and that is why we are not able to fully understand it. Lovejoy concluded, the word romantic has come to mean so many things that by itself it means nothing. Now it is clear. According to Lovejoy, why romanticism is something which is very difficult to understand is because it lacks any single real entity. That means basically you can say that how can we exactly define it? It lacks that. Why? Because it has so many meanings. There are so many things that can attribute to the idea of the word romantic. And because it means so many things, ideally you can say it means nothing. So the topic of the passage could be romantic aesthetics or understanding romantic aesthetics, if we have to make the topic slightly better. And the argument that we are trying to explore here is that scholars like Lovejoy argue that defining romanticism is challenging because the term is very diverse, very varied, very subjective. It has so many meanings and notions associated to it that it eventually makes it meaningless or non-understandable. So we have got some idea of what is the nature of the subject that is making it difficult for us to understand. Now let's go ahead and see what author has to say further. The more specific task of characterizing romantic aesthetics adds to these difficulties an air of paradox. When we read words like paradox, suddenly, we feel a chill down the spine. Don't worry about that. See, paradox is nothing but something which contradicts itself. Author says, the more specific task of characterizing romantic aesthetics adds to these difficulties an air of paradox. How we should characterize romantic aesthetics gives a paradox to it. Okay, let's see what is the paradox. Conventionally, aesthetics refers to a theory concerning beauty and art, a branch of philosophy that studies these topics. However, a contrast. However, many of the romantics rejected the identification of aesthetics with a circumscribed domain of human life that is separated from the practical and theoretical domains of life. Aesthetics is something which means beauty and art. According to romantics, they rejected the identification of aesthetics with a circumscribed domain of human life that is separated from practical and theoretical domains of life. The most characteristic romantic commitment is to the idea that character of art and beauty and of our engagement with them should shape all aspects of human life. Okay. Being fundamental to human existence, beauty and art should be a central ingredient, not only in philosophical or artistic life, but also in the lives of ordinary men and women. So this is the paradox. Paradox is, see, aesthetics means something which is related to beauty and art. Now, what is happening here? When we say romantic aesthetics, it means aesthetics related to romance. Think of it in this manner. I'm just trying to simplify it. When we think of romantic aesthetics, it means aesthetics related to romanticism, romantic aesthetics. But romantics believe that aesthetics should be part of every aspect of life, not just romanticism. So this is the paradox. That means the name, basically, what name represents, it is not exactly the thing that romantics expect. So let's try to understand it with a slightly vague but workable example. Think about this phrase, organized chaos. Now, this phrase is paradoxical in itself because it is contradictory in nature. organized chaos. How can chaos be organized? But within, it means that within the apparent disorder, there is a hidden order or a hidden structure. That is called organized chaos. The chaos is also organized. So here, romantic aesthetics presents a paradox because it challenges the conventional definition of aesthetics, emphasizing that art and beauty are all integral to all aspects of human existence rather than confined to a specific. The point is, basically, the challenge lies in a very elusive and suggestive nature of the romantic spirit. And so on. So author simply says that another challenge for any attempt to characterize romantic aesthetics lies in the fact that most of the romantics were poets and artists whose views of art and beauty, for the most part, to be found not in the developed theoretical account but in fragments. Another aspect is that these romantics have expressed their ideas about art and beauty in a very fragmented manner. So we do not really get a very specific idea of what they want to say. Okay. So they think that art should be part of everyone's life, but then the field is romantic aesthetics. That means aesthetics should be related to only romanticism. So this is the paradox. That's the opposition here. Basically, even if you are not able to understand that fully, one thing is clear that there is a significant difficulty in understanding romanticism because it is very elusive in nature. It is very suggestive in nature. It is very subjective in nature. There is no clear-cut definition of it because even the romantics have not really tried to give a very clear-cut understanding of it. Whatever they have talked about romanticism, it's very, very fragmented. Whatever they thought, they just said it. They never tried to fully define it. So the argument that we are trying to explore here is that characterizing romantic aesthetics is paradoxical, as romantics reject confining aesthetics to a specific reality and advocate that art and beauty should be part of all human life. Romantics say that art and beauty, aesthetic should be part of the entire human life, all human life, every aspect of human life. Then what is the point of the word romantic aesthetics? That's the paradox. Just trying to re-emphasize it on this couple of times so that we don't get confused. Nevertheless, in spite of these challenges, the task of characterizing romantic aesthetics is neither impossible nor undesirable. Oh, now this is interesting. Author says yes. So far, so many people have tried to define it. They were not successful. But this task of characterizing romantic aesthetics is not impossible. Right now, everything is just vague, everything is just subjective about it. But still, author says that characterizing romantic aesthetics is neither impossible nor undesirable. As numerous thinkers responding to Lovejoy's radical skepticism have noted. So Lovejoy said that, I think it's the scandal of literary and so and so. But numerous thinkers are not in line with Lovejoy's thinking. They think that, yes, it still can be defined. Lovejoy says it can't be defined. While warning against a reductive definition of romanticism, Berlin, for example, still heralded the need for a general characterization. What is it? Although one does have a certain sympathy with Lovejoy's despair, he is in this instance mistaken. There's a guy called Berlin. He's saying that, I can understand the despair of Lovejoy that, oh my God, what is this? Nobody is able to define romanticism because it is so vague. But in this case, this guy says that he is mistaken. There was a romantic movement and it is important to discover what it is. Basically, despite difficulties, there are thinkers like Berlin who say that defining romantic aesthetics is possible and it is in fact essential. While cautioning against oversimplification, they highlight the difference of identifying and understanding the romantic movement. So how you can actually define romantic aesthetics by understanding the romantic movement. How will we do that? We don't know. Maybe author will talk about it in this paragraph. Recent attempts to characterize romanticism and to stress its contemporary relevance follow this path. Instead of overlooking the undeniable differences between the variety of romanticisms of different nations that Lovejoy had stressed, such studies attempt to characterize romanticism not in terms of single definition, a specific time or specific place, but in terms of particular philosophical questions and concerns. Very interesting. How are you going to redefine that? How are you going to redefine romanticism? There are recent studies that have tried doing that. How? Very simple. By focusing on universal philosophical questions and going away from single definitions that are tied to time and place. Author says such studies attempt to characterize romanticism not in terms of single definition, not in terms of a specific time or a specific place, but in terms of particular philosophical questions and concerns. When we read this, there is a question that comes to our mind. On one hand, author is trying to go away from single definition. Listen to this carefully. On one hand, author is trying to go away from single definition and trying to come to a particular philosophical question. So we generally think that author is going away from the universal definition and coming to a specific definition. But no, this is not the meaning of this sentence. When author says that we should not characterize romanticism in a single definition, a specific time, specific place, that means, for example, today in Delhi, how would you categorize romanticism? That's the single definition. But say 10 years before today in Mumbai, somebody was thinking about another type of single definition at that time. So here we are talking about very particular, specific things. So if you are trying to define a particular thing on the basis of the time in which it is, on the basis of the place in which it is, then basically we are coming up with many definitions of it. So that's where we say that we are going away from that idea. And when author says in terms of particular philosophical questions, that means we should weigh romanticism on philosophical questions, specific philosophical questions. That means we should take into account all these specific philosophical questions and concerns and then derive a definition of it. Now that definition will be universal. That is the meaning of it. And that was probably the most challenging aspect of this passage. So let us understand this with an illustration. Think of it carefully and it's very easy. Imagine you have a big box of different toys, each with its own unique features, okay? Now, let's compare this to a study of romanticism. In the past, people tried to define romanticism by saying that it is like having only one specific toy in the box and that's it. But now researchers are being more open-minded. They are saying, hey, let's not focus on just one toy. Instead, let's look at the different ways, different interesting things that each toy can do. What makes each toy special? So they are not trying to force romanticism into a strict definition. Instead, they are exploring all the unique and cool things it represents. For example, one toy might represent love, another might be about nature, and yet another might be about freedom. Rather than saying romanticism is only about love, they are saying romanticism can be about many things, and each of those things is important. So in simple terms, it is like looking at various flavors in the ice cream shop. Instead of saying that there is only one flavor that defines ice cream, similarly, researchers are exploring all the different aspects that make romanticism interesting. They are not trying to stick to just one definition of it. Interesting, no? All right. Para 5. While the German, British, and French romantics are all considered, the central protagonists in the following are the German romantics. Two reasons explain this focus. First, because it has paved the way for the other romanticisms. German romanticism has a pride of place among different national romanticisms. Basically, author is just trying to laud German romanticism, that people focus on German romanticism more because it has a foundational role in influencing other romantic movements. Right? All right. So let's understand what this passage is about. The overall summary of the passage is that we are trying to define romantic aesthetics. It is a challenging aspect due to its multifaceted kind of subjective nature. There are recent studies that have focused on various philosophical questions to define romantic aesthetics, and they say that it is well possible and in fact a desirable. Author also brings into account the importance of German romanticism because of its depth and influence. Let's now look at the questions and learn. According to the passage, recent studies on romanticism avoid a single definition, specific time, or specific place because they, now it's very easy, now that we have understood it fully. All right. So we discussed this concept with the example of toys in a box. So why the studies are avoiding a single definition? Because they want to understand romanticism deeply, fully, comprehensively, with all the ideas that are part of it, not just one or two ideas. Any option that talks about the fact that recent studies are trying to understand romanticism deeply and comprehensively instead of narrowly should be my answer. Let's start. First, prefer to focus on fundamental concerns of the romantics. Okay. They are trying to avoid single definition because they want to focus on fundamental concern of romantics. What do you mean by that? This option says that recent studies are avoiding a single definition because they want to focus on fundamental concern, which means they want to understand it fundamentally from the foundation, comprehensively, deeply. That is exactly the reason why they don't want to go for single definition, because they want to fully understand romantics. So this should be the answer. Let's talk about second. Seek to discredit Lovejoy skepticism regarding romanticism. Very interesting. This option says that the intent of the recent studies to understand romanticism through not one definition is to demean Lovejoy's idea about romanticism. No, they are not trying to belittle Lovejoy. Their whole purpose of finding, a very comprehensive definition of romanticism is not to, say that, oh, let's try to bring Lovejoy down. No, that's wrong. So this is not the answer. Third, prefer to highlight the paradox of romantic aesthetics as a concept. Paradox is mentioned in the passage, but the intent of new studies is not to highlight any paradox. Intent of the study is to understand romanticism properly. If paradox becomes part of it in that understanding, that's fine. But that's not the intent. Hey, let me talk about the paradox. Let me talk about the opposite ideas. No. So third also is wrong. Fourth, understand that the variety of romanticisms renders a general analysis impossible. While the passage does acknowledge the variety of romanticisms and moves away from single definition, it doesn't explicitly state that a general analysis is impossible. Passage is not saying that it is impossible. In fact, passage is rather saying that it is possible. Again, the emphasis here is, let us try to understand romanticism through various vantage points, various points of views. But not to say that there are various vantage points, so analysis is impossible. So this is very, very wrong. Okay, so fourth also will not be the answer. Hence, my answer will be first one. According to romantics, aesthetics is what? So there is something that is given here in the passage about what is the understanding of aesthetics according to romantics. What is it that they feel? What is it that they feel that aesthetics should be part of every aspect of human life and not just confined to one aspect? Let's see which option talks about this, or something else maybe, if there is something else talked about from the perspective of romantics. Okay, so let's start with option one. According to romantics, aesthetics is primarily the concern of philosophers and artists rather than ordinary people. Okay. Aesthetics are saying that it is for romantics are saying that aesthetics is for everybody. Option is saying that it is primarily the concern of philosophers and artists only, but not of ordinary people. This is opposite to what passage is talking about, what romantics believe in aesthetics or about aesthetics. So one is wrong. According to romantics, it is the idea that is for everybody. It is the concern of everybody, not just few people. So one is gone. Second, should be confined to a specific domain separate from practical and theoretical aspects of life. Same thing. They think that it is a part which permeates every aspect of our existence. Author says, being fundamental to human existence, beauty and art should be central ingredient, not in just philosophical and artistic life, but also in the lives of ordinary men and women. It should shape every aspect of human life. You are saying that it should be confined to specific domain. So that is also wrong. It permeates all aspects of human life, philosophical and mundane. Yes, that is exactly what author is trying to say as to what romantics believe about aesthetics. So should be my answer. And fourth, it is widely considered to be irrelevant to human existence. No, 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 no. It is very, very relevant. That's why it should be part of the life of every single human. So this was very easy once we understand what is the stand of romantics on aesthetics. And hence third is the answer. The main difficulty in studying romanticism is, what is the main difficulty? Very easy, very interesting. The main problem in studying romanticism is like trying to catch butterfly with no clear shape or boundaries. The main problem, listen to this carefully. Understanding romanticism is challenging because this term is very diverse. It has many meanings. It makes it meaningless on its own. It is very subjective. Let's see which one talks about how foggy the idea of romanticism really is. And that should be my answer. Let's start with the first one. The main difficulty is the controversial and scandalous history of romantic literature. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Imagine someone saying that main issue with studying romanticism is because the literature from time to time is full of controversies and scandals. No. Although Lovejoy has pointed to that thing, that it is the scandal of literary and so things. But that's not the main difficulty. Main difficulty is that we don't have very clear idea of what romanticism really is. So one is wrong. Second, the elusive and suggestive nature of romantic aesthetics. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. When we read this, we realize that, definitely this should be the main difficulty. It's elusive. It is very suggestive, very subjective sort of a thing. But author basically mentions something in second paragraph. Author says that another challenge for any attempt to characterize romantic aesthetics lies in the fact that most of the romantics were poets and artists whose views of art and beauty are not found in developed theoretical account, but in fragments and all that, which are more often elusive and suggestive than conclusive. So here it suggests that the elusive and suggestive nature of romantic aesthetics is a challenge because the views of romantics are expressed in a fragmented manner, and those views are elusive. So while this supports the idea that romantic aesthetics can be elusive, it doesn't specifically state that this is the main difficulty. The text is elusive. How people are representing romanticism is elusive because it is spoken about in fragments. And the main difficulty is not that. Main difficulty is that because it is in fragments, because it is spoken by many people and it is spoken in varied terms, we don't know what it exactly is. So the broader issue is the lack of clear conceptual definition of romanticism, not the suggestive nature of the aesthetics of romantics. So second is something which seemed like an answer, but it is not. Third, lack of conceptual contours of the domain. Absolutely correct. We don't know what it is about. We don't have the conceptual clarity of this domain called romanticism. And that is the main difficulty. And let's talk about fourth, absence of written accounts by romantic poets and artists. No, there are written accounts by romantic poets and artists, even if they are in fragments or anything. Again, the problem is not being highlighted here. The problem is that it is very challenging to understand. Not that there are no accounts by romantic poets and artists. So my answer will be 3. Now, this is a question which will take slightly longer time for you to crack. And if you were stuck in this question was really a good candidate to be left unattempted. Which of the following statements is not supported by the passage? Okay, everything that is supported by the passage is not going to be my answer. So let's look at every single statement and weigh it according to what we have understood from the passage. Let's start with the first one. Recent studies on romanticism seek to refute the differences between national romanticisms. This statement is not supported by the passage. In fact, passage mentions that recent studies on romanticism do not overlook the differences between national romanticisms. Instead, they attempt to characterize romanticism without ignoring these differences. In your passage, you can look at this reference. Instead of overlooking, in para 4, instead of overlooking the undeniable differences between variety of romanticisms, the such studies attempt to characterize romanticism. So recent studies on romanticism, they don't seek to refute the differences. So first is something which is not supported by the passage. This should be the answer. Let's talk about second. Characterizing romantic aesthetics is both possible and desirable. Yes, this is supported by a statement. The passage says this thing, that we can still characterize romantic aesthetics, even if there are so many problems, so many challenges that are involved. So second is something I can infer, so not going to be my answer. Third, romantic aesthetics are primarily expressed through fragments, aphorisms, and poems. Yes, because they are expressed through fragments, aphorisms, poems, small things, vague things. Author is saying that is why it is difficult to understand them. So definitely that they are primarily expressed through these things. They are not very comprehensive. This is also something which is supported by the passage. It's given already. Again, it's coming from para 2, where it is written that most of the romantics were poets and artists whose views of art and beauty are not found in developed theoretical accounts. They are not found in developed theoretical accounts, but in fragments, aphorisms, poems. So third is also something which is supported by the passage. And fourth, many romantics rejected the idea of aesthetics as a domain separate from other aspects of life. Yes. Author says that romantics think that art is something which should not be specific to one aspect of life. It should be part of every aspect of life. So definitely romantics rejected this idea that aesthetics is separate from other aspect of life. No, it is not separate. It is part of it. So fourth also is something I can infer. Now, sometimes what happens? Sometimes students get slightly confused with option number 1. In that case, even if you are not able to understand option number 1 fully in the first go, you can easily eliminate 2, 3, and 4. And then just looking at option number 1 once again will tell you that, okay, this is going to be my answer. All right, let's look at this passage. Very interesting one. The biggest challenge the nutmeg curse by Ghosh throws down is to the prevailing understanding of when the climate crisis started. So this nutmeg curse by Ghosh, it should be a book or something. Author says that it is trying to tell us, or I would say that it is trying to redefine our understanding of when the climate crisis started. Most of us have accepted that it started with the widespread use of coal at the beginning of the industrial age in the 18th century and worsened with the mass adoption of oil and natural gas in the 20th. Most of us have accepted this thing. So when author says this thing that, hey, there is a book that is going to change our understanding of when climate crisis started, and most of us think of climate crisis, as this, that means author is now going to refute that understanding. So as I read this particular portion, I think that passage is more about when the climate crisis started. Okay, so that could be the topic of my passage. But let's read further, and if let's see if we can refine our topic of climate crisis to something else as well. Ghosh takes this history at least 3 centuries back. Oh, climate crisis didn't start in the beginning of industrial age and so and so. Ghosh takes this history 3 centuries back to the start of European colonialism in the 15th century. He starts the book with the 1621 massacre by Dutch invaders, determined to impose a monopoly on nutmeg civilization and trade in the Banda Islands in today's Indonesia. Author is just giving an account of the fact that, okay, when the climate crisis actually began, it actually began when European colonialism started. And there is one account which is given here, that in 1621, Dutch invaders came, they massacred, so-and-so people in Indonesia. They tried to impose a monopoly on nutmeg civilization. So, author eventually says that there are 2 points to which Ghosh returns through examples from around the world. One, how European colonists decimated not only the indigenous populations, but also the indigenous understanding of the relationship between humans and earth. So, one aspect is that what European colonists did, they just did not remove people from their way. They also removed the understanding of the relationship between humans and earth. So maybe these Banda people, these people in Banda Islands, they thought that, okay, our relationship with the nature is X. But as they decimated those people, as the Europeans decimated those people, they also removed that understanding. So when people are not there, their ideas also will not be there, no? And what was the second point to which Ghosh returns? How this invasion, not only of humans, but of Earth itself, and how this continues to present day by looking at nature as a resource to exploit. And what was the second concern? It was not just an invasion of humans, it was also the invasion of Earth. Because when European invaders came and they killed people, they took over their lands, they took over their vegetation and so forth, they removed their understanding of nature and humans. What did they do? They imposed their understanding of it. And what was their understanding? That nature is just a resource that one should exploit. So basically, my passage is climate crisis and colonialism, the impact of colonialism on climate crisis. And that is exactly the argument that I'm seeking to explore here in the para 1. Let's start with the next one. We know we are facing more frequent and more severe heat waves, storms, floods, drought, etc., due to climate change. We know our expansion through deforestation, dam building, canal cutting, in short, has brought us repeated disasters. Are these responses of an angry Gaia who has finally had enough? By using the word curse in the title, the author makes it clear that he thinks so. So author says that we are facing so many problems here. So many problems. Storms are there, floods are there, droughts are there, heat waves are there. Why it is happening? Do you think it is the response of an angry Gaia? G is capital. So basically, you can think of Gaia as an entity, a living entity. Author is basically saying that is it the response of a living entity that, hey, you destroyed me, now I'm going to destroy you? Author says yes. I use the pronoun who knowingly because Ghosh has quoted many non-European sources to inquire into the relationship between humans and the world around them, so that he can question the prevalent way of looking at Earth as an inert object to be exploited to maximum. Passage raises the question of whether the Earth's response in the form of climate change-induced disasters can be interpreted as a reaction from a living entity called Gaia. Now, author then says that I use the pronoun who knowingly because Ghosh has quoted many non-European sources to inquire into the relationship between humans and world around them. Ghosh has talked about many non-European sources of how they perceive the relationship between humans and the world around. And that relationship is not of exploitation. That relationship is not of treating Earth as an inert object. That is why author is talking about this pronoun who. Because non-Europeans think that Earth is a living entity. That is the meaning of it. And that's why author says that it seems to be the response of the Earth only. You can say that, Earth is like an angry Gaia that is taking the revenge. Okay. So non-Europeans think that Earth is not just an inanimate object. It is not just a non-living thing. It's a living entity. It's a live entity, not the one that should be exploited to the maximum, not just an object, which is a European point of view. There is a question also on it. We'll deal with that. Third, as Ghosh's text notes and bibliography show once more, none of this is new. This thought process is not new, treating Earth like an inert object and so on and so. There have always been challenges to the way European colonists looked at other civilizations on Earth. This is not new. European colonists have always looked at other civilizations and Earth in a different manner. There are challenges. They don't consider their point of view. It is just that the invaders and their myriad backers in the field of economics, politics, etc., have dominated global intellectual discourse. So, one, Europeans came, they colonized places. They also colonized minds of people by saying that Earth is a resource to be exploited. It is not a living entity. And all these intellectuals have helped them. So they have established this global idea that Earth is a resource to exploit. That is the meaning of it. There are other points of view that we can hear today if we listen hard enough. Okay, one was Europeans' point of view, colonists' point of view, that Earth is a non-living being that should be exploited. There are other points of view also that are there. If we listen hard enough, that means they are obscure, they are hidden, they are not in the popular writing, popular culture. Those observing global climate negotiations know about the Latin American way of looking at Earth as Pachamama, which is Earth Mother. So Latin Americans think that Earth is Mother. This is one view. They also know that such a framing is just provided lip service and is ignored in the substantive portions of negotiations. But nobody cares about that. People will say in their dialogues that, hey, Latin Americans think of Earth as their mother. That's all. But they don't really change themselves. In the Nutmeg's Curse, Ghosh explains why. Why is that the case? Very interesting. These are the reasons. There is a question on this also. Why other points of views are ignored? Because because of the extent of vested interests in the oil economy. Your money will be lost. If you are already deriving so much money from oil, then of course you would want to exploit Earth, no? You are controlling oil prices, you are controlling the oil polity and everything. Many of us know that power utilities are sabotaging decentralized solar power generation. The power companies are destroying the decentralized solar power generation also, which is also the reason why other views are not there. So the point is that eventually it is a point of loss for them if they agree to the definition that Earth is mother. Earth is a living entity. That's why they don't listen to the alternative perspectives. So very interesting passage. The passage talks about that there are the conventional views on climate crisis, and he tries to address them by saying that climate crisis actually began through colonialism. And he also highlights that there is significant exploitation of Earth that is happening because of a prevalent narrative, and there are challenges to it because of Eurocentric perspectives. Let's look at the questions now. Which of the following best explains the primary purpose of the discussion of colonization of the Banda Islands in Nutmeg's Curse? What is the primary purpose? Very easy. The primary purpose of discussing the idea of colonialism is to make readers aware of the fact that Europeans thought of Earth as a resource to exploit, which eventually became the broader mindset and the prevalent narrative. And that thing contributed to climate change. Let's see which option captures this idea. Let's start with option 1. To illustrate how systemic violence against the colonized constituted the cornerstone of colonialism. This option states that main intent of the passage is to tell readers that systemic violence was the central aspect of colonialism. Absolutely not. The intent of the passage is not to tell you that, hey, colonialists really did a lot of violence. No. The idea is that, yes, this is a central idea, a central aspect of colonialism. But passage is focusing on something else. Passage is focusing on the fact that through force and narrative, the European idea constituted climate change. So 1 is not the answer. Let's talk about 2. To illustrate the first instance in history when the processes responsible for climate change were initiated. First, author doesn't say that occupation of Banda Islands by the British was the first instance when the processes responsible for climate change began. He starts the book with that event. So this is wrong. Now, even if you think that it was the first instance, the main intent of colonization was not to tell you the first instance, but it was to tell you that how Europeans have contributed to climate change. So that way also it is wrong. So this is a very wrong option, basically. Option 3. To illustrate how colonialism represented and perpetuated the mindset that has led to climate change. Absolutely correct. That is the only intent. That colonialism perpetuated a narrative which led to climate change. That Earth is a resource to exploit. Hey, everyone should think of that. Fourth, to illustrate the role played by the cultivation of certain crops in plantation mode in contributing to climate change. Author doesn't say that crops were responsible for climate change. It was the exploitative practices of Europeans. So this was also wrong. Hence my answer is 3. All of the following can be inferred from the reviewer's discussion of nutmeg's curse, except. That means what is it that you cannot infer from reviewer's discussion? So what is it? Why Ghosh has written this thing? Because Ghosh is trying to challenge the prevailing understanding of the start of climate crisis. Ghosh wants to tell you that, hey, climate crisis is not when it began, when you think it began. It actually began long ago. And these were the reasons for that. Let's see which of the following can not be inferred. First one, the contemporary dominant perception of nature and the environment was put in place by processes of colonialism. This is true. The contemporary, that means modern understanding about nature and environment was put in place by Europeans. They set the current narrative through their practices, through their intellectuals, that Earth is not a living entity and so on. So whatever we are thinking about Earth, whatever we are thinking about environment, all this thing was placed by colonialist processes. So this is something which can easily be inferred from reviewers' discussion of nutmeg's curse. So this is not the answer. Second, the history of climate change is deeply intertwined with history of colonialism. Bang on. That is exactly what the passage is about. This is correct. Author says that history of climate change can be traced back to colonialism, who established the idea, colonialism that established the idea that nature is a thing to be exploited. So this is something also I can infer from reviewers' discussion of the nutmeg's curse. So not my answer. Third, academic discourses have always served the function of raising awareness about environmental preservation. This is absolutely wrong. First, the passage doesn't explicitly state that academic lectures have helped raise awareness about environmental preservation. Secondly, passage says that Europeans were backed by their intellectuals in the field of economics, chemistry, blah, 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 to establish the prevalent discourse, which is that Earth is a thing to be exploited. So we can't infer that academic discourses have served the function of raising the awareness about environment. If at all, academic discourses have served the function of not raising the awareness about environmental preservation, or rather raising the awareness about environmental exploitation. So third is something I can't infer from reviewers' discussion. That should be the answer. Fourth, environmental preservation policy makers can learn a lot from non-Europeans and pre-colonial societies. Yes. If Europeans destroyed the environment and disregarded others' points of view, such as those of Latin Americans, about Earth or nature being an important element and not something to be exploited, then it makes sense that there's a lot to learn about environmental preservation from these alternative, positive perspectives about it. So this is also something I can infer, that environmental preservation policymakers can learn a lot from the non-European aspect about how they perceive nature, how they perceive Earth. And hence my answer is 3. This is something I can't infer from reviewers' discussion of the nutmeg's curse. On the basis of information in the passage, which one of the following is not a reason for the failure of policies seeking to address climate change? Very easy. Which of the following is not a reason? Reasons are mentioned here. Author talks about the reasons of failure of policies that are trying to address climate change. What are those reasons? You are not looking at the alternative viewpoints. You have vested interest in oil economy. You are sabotaging decentralized solar power generation. All these are the reasons why there is a failure of policies that are trying to address climate change. Which of the following is not the reason for failure? We have to find that. So everything which is the reason should not be my answer. Let's start with first one. The decentralized characteristic of renewable energy resources like solar power. The option is written in a beautiful manner. Power utilities are sabotaging decentralized solar power generation. This is given. This is the reason which is mentioned in the passage, which is leading to the failure of policies that are trying to address climate change. Now, the option says that decentralized characteristic of renewable energy sources is the reason of failure of policies that wants climate change. No. Their decentralized characteristic is a good thing. But power utilities are destroying their decentralization. This destruction of decentralization is the reason of failure of policies, not the characteristic of decentralization itself. So option 1 is not the reason of failure. This should be the answer. Option 1 could have been a failure if the option 1 had been framed in a manner that the sabotaging of decentralized characteristic of renewable energy sources, then it would be the reason for failure. But just that characteristic, that's a good thing. That's why they are trying to sabotage it. So 1 is my answer. It is not the reason for failure. Let's talk about 2. Global dominance of oil economies and international politics built around it. Yes, absolutely. Vested interest in oil economies. US is controlling everything. The entire geopolitics related to oil drilling and all that stuff. So basically, it's the dominance of oil economies. They are controlling everything. Their international politics that is built only around oil. That is causing the failure of policies to address climate change. So second is wrong because this is the reason. Greed of organizations benefiting from non-renewable energy resources. Yes, it comes from that only. Non-renewable energy resources like oil. They have a lot to give to these organizations, countries, a lot of money. Their entire revenue system goes for a toss if they do not look for oil, if they don't sell oil, they don't produce oil. So this greed is, of course, the reason why the policies are failing. Fourth, the marginalized status of non-European ways to look at nature. Yes, marginalized means reduced, smaller, very easy to infer. You are just rejecting or not fully accepting, say, Latin Americans' views or various other alternative views that look at nature and environment differently. Not looking at them, not learning from them is also a reason of failure of policies. So fourth also is not my answer. First is the answer. Which of the following, if true, would make the reviewer's choice of the pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate? A very interesting question, slightly challenging application question. Let's understand it. What would make reviewer's choice of the pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate? First, understand why author has used the pronoun who for Gaia. Author has used the pronoun who for Gaia to say that Earth is a living entity and it can become angry. For living beings, you use the pronoun who, right? For example, Rajesh, who is my friend? Not this book, who is my friend. For non-living entities, you use that. So you are using who because Gaia is a living entity. Who is considering Gaia as a living entity, Earth as a living entity? The non-Europeans. Which would make the choice of pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate? If the people who perceive Earth as living entity think of it as non-living entity. If the non-Europeans, if the people who are thinking Earth as living entity, if they also think of Earth as a non-living entity, you can't use who for that. Once we now understand this thing, now it is easy. What would make the pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate? Okay, let's start with first one. Modern Western science discovers new evidence for the Earth being an inanimate object. Whatever Western science believe is not the concern here. Because reviewer is calling Earth as a living entity in response to Western idea of Earth as non-living entity. So this option will not make the choice of pronoun for pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate. Modern Western science is not discovering anything new. If it sees Earth as inanimate object, they have been looking at Earth that way only. So this statement would not make reviewers' choice inappropriate because the use of who for Gaia is not determined by specific scientific understandings, but on the basis of exploration of various perspectives that call Earth as human. So one is not my answer. Second, non-European societies have perceived the Earth as a non-living source for all non-living source of all resources. Yes, if non-Europeans, that means those who do not possess the European idea that Earth is non-living entity, those who feel Earth is a living entity, if they start believing that Earth is non-living for resources, then the use of pronoun who is inappropriate. Then you will not be able to call Gaia as who, because then Gaia is also a non-living entity. So two should be the answer. Now, second option actually talks about this thing that the people who perceive Earth as living entity, they start believing it as non-living entity. Third, there is a direct cause-effect relationship between human activities and global climate change. This option is not talking about change in perspective about the Earth from being perceived as living entity to a non-living entity. So this is irrelevant. Fourth, Ghosh's book has different title, The Nutmeg's Revenge. Nutmeg's Revenge doesn't necessarily say that, Gaia is not human or Gaia is human. Basically, it is dependent on, again, perspective of people regarding Earth, not the title of someone's book. Who knows the Nutmeg's Revenge means actually the nutmeg is taking revenge. Who is Nutmeg? Maybe Nutmeg is the name of a person. We don't know. So just from the title of book, we can't really infer. That's why it will have no bearing on whether Gaia is treated a living entity or not. So this is also basically irrelevant. So this was a tricky question. If you do not fully understand it as to how you are going to deal with it, it's better that you skip it. Let's look at this passage. In 2006, the Met agreed to return the Euphronis crater, a masterpiece Greek urn that had been a museum draw since 1972. In 2007, the Getty agreed to return 40 objects to Italy, including so and so. And there are other museums also that are returning various pieces to these countries, Cambodia and all. When I read this, I realize that it is about returning the cultural artifacts. And because you are returning, that means you are probably returning it to the source country. Why author is saying this thing, I don't know so far. So let's read what is there. Cultural property or patrimony laws limit the transfer of cultural property outside the source country's territory, including outright export prohibitions and national ownership laws. There are cultural property laws, patrimony. Okay. What are they doing? They are trying to limit the transfer of cultural property outside the source countries. For example, if something was dug in Cambodia, then the cultural property laws of Cambodia will prevent that artifact to go out of country. So if there is a foreign country that came to Cambodia, started digging certain things, found say, a statue of Lord Vishnu. Now they say that, okay, because we found it, we are going to take it with them. The cultural property or patrimony laws will not allow them to do it. This is the meaning of it. So it seems like I'm talking about the cultural property laws. Okay. And then author also says here that most art historians, archaeologists, museum officials, and policymakers portray cultural property laws in general as invaluable tools for counteracting the ugly legacy of Western cultural imperialism. Why cultural patrimony laws are there? Because they so that they can counter Western cultural imperialism. That means Westerners tried to steal cultural things from their colonies. And to deal with that, so that they don't steal stuff, good stuff, these laws are a valuable tool. During the late 19th and early 20th century, an era former Met director Thomas Hoving called the age of piracy. American and European art museums acquired antiquities by hook or by crook. From grave robbers or souvenir collectors, author is just saying how these, Western Western countries or Western museums, American, European, etc., acquired really good artifacts, and not from a very proper source, from robbers, souvenir collectors. If they dug something that was their bounty, they just took it, and so and so. And from where? Mostly the art-rich source countries, which are poor. Patrimony laws were intended to protect future archaeological discoveries against these thoughts. Otherwise, they will keep on doing this thing. I surveyed, author is talking about his perspective, that I surveyed 90 countries with one or more archaeological sites on UNESCO World Heritage Site list. And my study shows that in most cases, the number of discovered sites diminished sharply after a country passes a cultural property law. Why author is bringing this thing into account? Author says that when cultural patrimony laws are passed, the discovery of archaeological sites significantly decreases. That means when cultural property laws are there, you do not really excavate a lot. You do not really you're not able to explore a lot. Now this is interesting. I'm going to ask you to just stop here and think about it. Author so far said that cultural property laws are so good, this, that, and whatnot. They are protecting us against Western imperialism, Western cultural imperialism. Why suddenly author brought this perspective that if you bring culture, but cultural property laws also inhibit or exploration? Maybe author is also talking about the downside of cultural property laws. So this is slightly mathematical that you had to think about here. That author says that there were 222 archaeological sites listed for those 90 countries. When you look into the history of the sites, you see that all but 21 were discovered before cultural property laws. That means majority of these sites were discovered when property laws were not there. Once property laws were there, then only 21 were discovered, very few. And that is exactly what author says, that strict cultural patrimony laws are popular in most countries, but there is a downside to it. What is the downside? That it reduces the incentives for foreign governments, non-governmental organizations, and educational institutions to invest in overseas exploration, because their efforts will not be rewarded by opportunities to hold, display, or study what is uncovered. So, for example, if today, say, Iran is not Iran thinks that, hey, there are so many cultural things that are there in my country, but I don't have enough money to really excavate and see and do research on it and so and so. So what should I do? Now, India here is thinking that, hey, Iran is something which contains a lot of artifacts, and it is good that we should study. Our historians should study this. So I am going to invest a lot of money in Iran for this excavation. But if they have cultural property laws that even if you do anything for Iran, eventually neither you will be allowed to study, nor you will be allowed to display those things in your country for some time and so, vagera, etc., etc. So will India have an incentive to invest? No. That is what author is saying, that strict cultural patrimony laws are popular, but they also have a downside. Now, author says, to the extent that source countries can fund their archaeological projects, artifacts and sites may still be discovered. But some countries that are poor, they can reap the benefits of new archaeological discoveries only when they narrow their cultural property laws. If you don't even have money and you have strict property laws, then you will not be able to, what will you do of those laws? Neither you are excavating and finding what your culture is about, nor you are letting others do that. And author says that if they reduce their cultural property laws, if they narrow them down, if they make them relaxed, it will actually increase the tourism and cultural pride of these poor countries. Author doesn't say that you should abolish them, but you should just narrow them down so that it can bring a sort of win-win situation. Then there is an example given of China. that China provides an interesting alternative approach, and so and so. Basically, it's the China's idea that it shifted from restrictive laws to collaborative international research. Now, what happened? This led to an increase in World Heritage Site nominations because they are doing it collaboratively. So, very interesting. The passage is talking about cultural patrimony laws, and there are certain restrictions to it as well. And passage has a very specific focus on how the cultural patrimony laws are serving as, a bulwark against the Western cultural imperialism. Let's look at the questions. Which one of the following statements best expresses the paradox of patrimony laws? I don't think that there is a question which can be easier than this in this passage. Which expresses the paradox? What is the paradox here? The thing that was supposed to protect your cultural entities, which is cultural patrimony laws, is the same thing that is causing you to not discover your cultural entities. How? Because strict patrimony laws do not let countries find out new archaeological discoveries because they don't have money in excavations. Let's look at the options and see which option expresses this paradox, that the thing that was supposed to protect you is the thing that is causing you harm also. And that is option 2. They were aimed at protecting cultural property, but instead they reduced new cultural discoveries. So they were supposed to protect cultural property, yes, but what is the paradox? The same thing is also reducing their new archaeological discoveries because you're not allowing others to dig and you don't have money to dig. Every other option is irrelevant. They were intended to protect cultural property but resulted in neglect of historical sites. No. They were intended to protect cultural property but instead resulted in withholding of national treasure from museums. No, nothing like that. What is a paradox? Paradox is something which is, this paradox is that something which is supposed to protect you is the same thing which is also causing you harm. Hence, my answer is 2. It can be inferred from the passage that archaeological sites are considered important by some source countries because they, again, very easy. Why? We are not going to look at the options. Why the source countries think that archaeological sites are important? What is it that is beneficial for them? Because these archaeological sites will increase their tourism and cultural standing. They will give them money. Archaeological sites are important for some source countries, especially developing countries, because they increase tourism. Let's see which option is the answer. Very simple. First one, because they give boost to tourism sector. Archaeological sites are not important because they are subject to patrimony laws or they are symbol of Western imperialism or they generate funds for future discoveries. No, nothing like that is mentioned. If I talk about, say, a country called Cambodia, Cambodia is, not a very affluent country. For them, archaeological sites are important because the more they dig, the more they can invite people to just look. Their tourism will improve. From the passage, we can infer that author is likely to advise poor but archaeologically rich source countries to do all of the following except. Very interesting question. Author will advise any option where source country is getting helped by other countries, right? What will author not advise? Any option where source country is incurring losses. Let's see. Author is likely to not advise. What is it that author will not advise them? Let's start with the first one. To find ways to motivate other countries to finance archaeological explorations in their country. Definitely, author will advise the countries to find ways to motivate other countries to finance excavation in their country. This helps them find cultural artifacts at the cost of others. So this is not the answer. Source country is getting helped by other countries. Second, allow foreign countries to analyze and exhibit the archaeological finds made in the source country. This is also helpful. Why? Because this is also helpful to source country. Why? Because analysis of artifacts is an important thing and someone else is doing it on their behalf. So it's a good cost benefit, good expertise benefit to the source country. So this also is something that author will recommend, not my answer. Third, fund institutes in other countries to undertake archaeological exploration in the source country, reaping the benefits of cutting edge techniques. Here, now listen to this carefully. Here, the source country is shelling out funds from its own pockets. And these are poor countries, by the way. So even if they are getting the benefit of cutting edge technologies, who cares about that? If the money is going from your pocket, if you're a poor country. So author will not recommend a poor country to fund institutes in other countries. Author should recommend poor countries to take the money from other countries. No. So third is something which he would not recommend. That should be the answer. And fourth is adopt China's strategy of dropping its cultural property laws. Yeah, that's a good strategy, collaborative understanding and so and so. So author will recommend that. So my answer is 3. Which of the following statements, if true, would undermine the central idea of the passage? Now, this is a question which is extremely tricky, very interesting, and a definite candidate for leaving unattempted. Let's understand what are the various aspects of the central idea of the passage. Central idea of the passage is around the fact that Western countries have looted poor countries by taking their cultural artifacts. It's also about patrimony laws that are bringing these cultural artifacts back to source countries. And it is also about poor source countries are getting the benefit of patrimony laws, but are also suffering losses because they are not able to invest in excavations. So they can't reap the benefits, economic benefits of tourism. And then author also recommends that there should be certain changes that should be done in patrimony law so that source country can reap benefits through collaboration and whatnot, which will undermine means weaken the central idea of the passage. So anything that goes against these could undermine the central idea of the passage. Let's start with the first one. Western countries will have to apologize to countries for looting their cultural property in past century. Yes, this is true. This is going to support the central idea. Western countries have done a wrong thing. They should apologize for that. So this doesn't undermine the central idea. Second, museums established in economically deprived, archaeologically rich source countries can display the antiques discovered there. This also gives a potential benefit to economically deprived countries that have rich cultural heritage. So this is also in line with the central idea that poor countries can display their antiques in their museums. So this also will not be the answer. Third, our affluent, archaeologically rich source countries can afford to carry out their own excavations. This is an interesting option, actually. When we read it for the first time, it seems that it is contradicting the central idea. But it is actually not. Why? Here you are saying that rich countries can finance their own excavations. True. But the central idea is about poor countries and how they can finance. So this option, which rich countries can do on their own, is not part of the main concern that is something we are talking about. So this option neither supports the passage nor weakens the central idea. So this is a neutral option, and that's why it should be rejected. And the moment you reject it, most of people, actually picked this one as the answer. Then option number 4 becomes a big problem. UNESCO finances archaeological research in poor but archaeologically rich source countries. This ideally also should support the central idea because you are getting the finances from other countries. The poor country is getting the finance from an international organization. So if this is the case, then none of the options are actually undermining the central idea. How can this be possible? Now let's look at this option. Very confusing option. UNESCO is financing archaeological research in poor countries. This is given. But whether poor countries are getting the benefit of it or not, and to what extent, is not clear in the option. According to the central idea, international government or non-government organizations should be able to help the poor source countries, but will also look forward to the benefits that the investor country is deriving from such a collaboration. The current option talks about the investment, which is part of central idea, but it doesn't talk about benefits for the poor country. So in that sense, there is a degree of uncertainty as to whether it fully supports the central idea or not. And that's why this is an option among the lot which is slightly away from the central idea and also talks about the things that are mentioned in it, unlike the third one, which is not even talking about that. If I were you, I would not attempt this question at all. The moment I read the fourth one, I'll realize that there is no clear-cut distinction. And that is where you also have to understand that in questions where there is too much interpretation involved and all the answers look pretty similar, not too distinguishable, the best action is to just leave the question, do not even deliberate on it. So a good candidate for not attempting the question. Let's do this one. Steven Pinker's new book, Rationality, offers a pragmatic dose of measured optimism. When I read this line, the line is slightly challenging. But when I read it further, we realize that the passage is not very difficult. There is a new book, Rationality, Steven Pinker's book. It offers a pragmatic, a very practical dose of measured optimism. That means don't be optimistic as such, too much. You should be rational. Author says that rationality is a fragile, but it's an achievable ideal in personal life. Pinker's ambition to illuminate such a crucial topic offers the welcome prospect to a return to sanity. It is no small achievement to make formal logic, game theory, statistics, etc. full of charm and relevance. So we are talking about rationality through Steven Pinker's eye. And we are deliberating on the idea and the importance of rationality, that it has brought, sanity in our lives. And it has made the rational tools like statistics, etc., logic, relevant and interesting. So the passage is about the importance of rationality, but why? Author is saying that rationality is important to our life. That is not something which is given so far. Maybe author will elaborate on that. Let's see. It is also plausible to believe that a wider application of the rational tools he analyzes would improve the world in important ways. His primer on statistics and scientific uncertainty is particularly timely and should be required reading before consuming any news about the COVID pandemic. More broadly, he argues that less media coverage of shocking but vanishingly rare events from so-and-so would help prevent dangerous overreactions. What is the importance of rationalism? He says that rational tools can actually benefit the world widely. He says all these rational tools like statistical understanding, etc., they help you take proper decisions. They help you avoid overreaction. They help you avoid resource misallocation. They don't let you fall for the media coverage that, okay, if media is saying that COVID is bad, COVID, then you are just saying that, okay, COVID is the thing. But if you think rationally, then you will also be able to realize that there are more important concerns in the world than COVID pandemic. So you would be able to focus on that. That is the power of rationality. It is a reasonable critique, and Pinker is not the first one to make it. But analyzing the political economy of journalism would have given a fuller picture of why so much coverage is so misguided and what we might do about it. So author says that, yeah, this has always been the case. But why this is the case? Why so much of the media coverage is misguided? For that, we need to understand the political economy of journalism. Basically, author is just saying that they have money to reap from it, but that should not really take you away from your rationality. You should think rationally, not fall for what media is representing. Pinker's main focus is the sort of conscious sequential reasoning that can track the steps in a geometric proof or an argument in formal logic. What is his focus? That consciously reasoning something one by one, step by step to arrive at a conclusion. Skill in this domain maps directly onto the navigation of many real-world problems, and Pinker shows how greater mastery of the tools of rationality can improve decision-making in medical, legal, financial, etc. contexts. Author says this skill of thinking everything rationally reason-wise, logically, can help us improve decision-making in various fields. Now, author says, despite the undeniable power of the sort of rationality he describes, many of the deepest insights in the history of science, maths, and so have been originated in the moments of epiphany. So, Steven Pinker is saying that rationality is very good for decision making. You should do that. You should master the tools of rationality. But then author says that despite the undeniable power of rationality, rationality is very powerful. But there are some really, really interesting insights, deepest insights in science, math, history. They are not derived from rationality. They are derived from intuition, epiphany. And some examples are given: Mozart symphonies, benzene structure, and whatnot. Then author says even Plato's Socrates, who anticipated many of Pinker's points by nearly 2,500 years, showing the virtue of knowing what you do not know and examining all premises and arguments, not simply trusting speakers as authority or charisma, attributed many of his profound insights to dreams and visions. Now there is a guy called Plato. Plato is in line with rationality. Plato is in line with the idea of rationality and logic, like Pinker. But he also says, a very rational person also is saying that, hey, most of my profound insights come from dreams and visions, not from rationality. And so on. So basically, author is just trying to say that rationality is very powerful, but there is intuition also. There are certain things beyond logical analysis that have been the source of creativity. The role of moral and ethical education in promoting rational behavior is also underexplored. So there is another thing that is not fully explored. What is it? What is the role of morality? What is the role of ethics in promoting rational behavior? Pinker recognizes that rationality is not just a cognitive virtue, but a moral one. But this profoundly important point, once subtly explored by ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, doesn't really get developed. Author says that there is a role of morality in rationality. Even Greeks have thought about it. But this idea is not fully developed. So what is the lack in development here? Author says, having a right moral character is the precondition for using rationality in beneficial ways. There's a question also on it later on. Let me give you a quick example of how you can think of it. Author says that, imagine you are trying to come up with a new technology. And that new technology can generate a lot of energy at minimum cost of fuel. Now, so that's a logical thought, how you're going to derive to that process where you can generate a lot of energy. Now, if your thought process was that I should make a technology like this so that I can threaten some countries that if you don't do that, I'm going to use it as a bomb. So that was a wrong ethical idea to reach rationality. But if you're thinking that there is an energy crisis that I have to solve, if that was your idea, that was the right ethical idea to reach the same technology. Author says that right moral character is a precondition for using rationality in a beneficial way. But this is something that Pinker has not really fully developed. Pinker says that role is there. Role of moral and ethical education in promoting rational behavior is there. But what exactly is that role? Pinker doesn't talk about it. All right. So what we are talking about, the importance of rationality in decision-making process, and also author emphasizes the importance of epiphany or intuition in generating a lot of new good stuff. Author also talks about that there is the role of moral education in promoting rational behavior, but it is not deeply explored. Now let's do the questions. The author mentions Kekule's discovery of the structure of benzene and Mozart's symphonies to illustrate the point that. Why author has talked about these things? Very easy. Author has spoken of these examples to tell us that not everything comes from the result of rational thinking. Things can come from epiphany also, intuition also. There is only one option that talks about it. That is option number 3. Great innovations across fields can stem from flashes of intuition and are not always propelled by logical thinking. Every other option is irrelevant. It is not even talking about why author has mentioned these examples. So third is my answer. According to the author, for Pinker as well as for ancient Greek philosophers, rational thinking involves all of the following except. What is it that is not part of rational thinking for Pinker and Greek philosophers is what we have to find out. So, whatever is the similarity of thinking between Pinker and Greek philosophers on rationality will not be my answer. Let's now look at the options. First, the belief that the ability to reason logically encompasses an ethical and moral dimension. Nice question. Listen to this carefully. In the passage, it is written that Pinker recognizes rationality not just as a cognitive virtue, but a moral one. Both Pinker and ancient Greek philosophers, according to the author, recognize that rationality is not a cognitive virtue, not just a cognitive virtue, but a moral one. It implies that reasoning logically is linked to ethical and moral considerations. So this is part of rational thinking done by both Pinker and Greek. So this is not the answer. Second, arriving at independent conclusions irrespective of who is presenting the argument. Again, in passage, you will be able to see that it is written that showing the virtue of knowing what you do not know and examining all premises in arguments, not simply trusting speaker's authority or charisma. What is the meaning of it? Pinker and Greek philosophers also emphasize the importance of examining everything in the argument. They are not saying that we should just trust the speakers because they are so affluent speakers. No, author says, think of everything carefully. So this suggests that you should arrive at independent conclusion, your own conclusion. You should not worry about who is presenting the argument. So if today George Bush talks about something and, Rajkumar Bansal, my neighbor talks about the same thing, then just because George Bush is saying that thing doesn't mean that it has value and Rajkumar Bansal's thought doesn't have any value. You should arrive at independent conclusion irrespective of who should present the argument. This is definitely the thing that both Greeks and Pinker are saying. So second also should not be the answer. Third, the primacy of conscious sequential reasoning as basis for seminal human achievements. No, 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 no. On one hand, passage is saying that there are so many seminal human achievements, so many things like benzene discovery, Mozart symphony, and whatnot. This is an outcome of what? Not logic and reasoning, but of epiphany. You are saying that they both believe that sequential reasoning is the basis for such achievements. No, that is opposite. That is not the part of Pinker and Greek philosophers' argument. It is opposite to what is mentioned in the passage. So third should be the answer. Fourth, an awareness of underlying assumptions in argument and gaps in one's knowledge. Very interesting one. Passage, again, we'll again go back to the same idea. That passage says that both Greeks and Pinker believe in the fact that you should not go for the charisma of speaker. You should analyze the arguments on your own. Option says an awareness of what are the underlying assumptions in arguments and what are the gaps in one knowledge is very important. Yes, because if you have that awareness of underlying assumptions and gaps in your knowledge, only then you will be able to fully understand a premise on its merit, not on the basis of who is presenting that argument. So this was something which should be derived, but fourth is also something which is in line with rational thinking for both Pinker and Greeks. Therefore, third is the answer. The author refers to ancient Greek philosophers too. Okay. There are ancient Greek philosophers which are invoked here. Ancient Greek philosophers have been invoked to talk about the lack of Pinker's argument on the importance of ethics for rationality. Pinker mentions that being rational is not just about thinking, but also about being a good person. However, he does not talk much about how being a good person is crucial for using rationality in a positive manner. Author says that rationality is both a cognitive truth, cognitive virtue, which means related to intelligence, cognition, and it is also a moral virtue, which means related to ethics. But then author says that even Greeks have explored it, but doesn't really get developed. Greeks came earlier. They have explored it. Pinker also have explored it, but it doesn't get developed. That means Pinker still has a lot of gaps in his understanding of how ethics can be something which is important for rational thinking to be used in beneficial way. That's what you had to understand from this. And we have also discussed the example of creating an energy source as a bomb, or as a panacea for the energy crisis of the world, as to how ethical thinking is the basis for rational thinking. Now let's look at the options. Let's start with first one. To show how dreams and visions have influenced subconscious behavior. No, your answer should be that Greek philosophers have been invoked to talk about the gaps in the understanding of Pinker vis-a-vis the role of ethics in rationality. First is not talking about that. Indicate various similarities between their thinking and Pinker's conclusion. No. In fact, we are talking about what is the difference in the thinking vis-a-vis ethics and rationality. So second also is not right. Highlight the influence of their thinking on a development of Pinker's arguments. Very interesting. See, option 3 is wrong because we have no information on how much influence Greeks had on Pinker's arguments. We have no information on that. We are establishing parallels. Author is establishing parallels, but whether there was an influence of Greek thinkers on Pinker and to what extent, we don't know. Fourth, reveal gaps in Pinker's discussion of the importance of ethical considerations in rational behavior. Absolutely correct. To reveal the gaps that are there in how ethics are important in promoting positive rationality. So fourth is something which will be the answer. Tricky question, certainly doable, required a bit of. The author endorses Pinker's view on the importance of logical reasoning as it, okay, what is the importance of logical reasoning? So that we can take good decisions in real world context for the right issues and not fall for media generated hoopla. Let's see which option talks about that. First, provides a moral compass for resolving important ethical dilemmas. No. Logical reasoning, according to Pinker, is not to solve ethical dilemmas. Gone. What is the importance of logical reasoning? As it helps people to gain expertise in statistics and other scientific disciplines. No. The intent of the passage is not that, hey, you should learn stats. It's about how you can use a rational tool like statistics to make good decisions for the real world scenarios. Not to gain expertise in statistics also. What will you do with gaining expertise in statistics if you are not even using that for the bigger purpose that author is talking about? So second is wrong. Third, equips people with the ability to tackle challenging practical problems. Yes, this is correct. Logical reasoning equips them with the ability to deal with actual problems and not the problems that are being called the actual problems due to sensational coverage. Fourth, focuses public attention on real issues like development rather than sensational events. Interesting option. The need of logical reasoning is not for shifting people's attention to some other issue. The need of logical reasoning is how you can solve the real world issue. Moving attention somewhere and solving something are two different things. So this is not the answer. Hence my answer is 3. The main sentence is that for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as freestanding entities abstracted from their contexts of use in actual human activities. We don't actually derive a lot of stuff from the main sentence, but there are one or two things that we can definitely think about. First, author is saying that for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as this thing. So this is a very specific qualification of arguments. which means that it is desirable that you define arguments first, you introduce arguments first, and then talk about them in their theoretical idea for the theoretical purpose, which means that this sentence cannot be the beginning sentence of my paragraph. Another thing that we can think about is that when author says that for theoretical purposes, this thing is considered this way, then there is a good chance that author is also going to talk about something else which should either be an extension of this argument or a contrast of this argument. For example, for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as freestanding entities, but for practical purposes, arguments may be considered as something else. Something like that. So if there is a context given in the passage, then I know that this sentence should come before it. Now, having these things in mind, let's go ahead and understand the passage. First blank will not be the answer, certainly. Why? Because the sentence immediately after it defines an argument. It says an argument can be defined as a complex symbolic structure where some parts, known as the premises, offer support to another part, the conclusion. Okay. Alternatively, an argument can be viewed as so and so things. So first 4 lines are talking about what an argument is. It can be defined in this way or that way. Now there is a blank and then there is a sentence after it. Let's read it. The relation of support between premises and conclusion can be cashed out in different ways. The premises may guarantee the truth of the conclusion or make truth more probable, etc. Now this is very interesting. There is a definition of argument which is talking about premises and conclusion. The sentence coming after blank 2 is talking about the relation between premises and conclusion and how we can understand that, which means there is no gap in the argument. It is flowing seamlessly. You identified that there are 2 things that define argument, but how those things are related to each other has to be a very important part of that definition of argument. And that is exactly what is given after blank number 2. So neither blank 1 can be my answer, nor blank 2 can be my answer. Now let's talk about the sentence after blank 3. But depending on one's explanatory goals, there is also much to be gained from considering arguments as they in fact occur in human communicative practices. This is exactly we talked about. My main sentence talks about that for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as this thing. And now, after blank 3, there is a contrast given. But how arguments can be considered in terms of communicative practices. For example, practical purposes, you can say. So this makes sense that I talk about how I am perceiving arguments for theoretical purposes and how for practical or communicative purposes, arguments are perceived. So third option becomes the perfect one for me to place my actual sentence. And of course, it will not come in fourth one because now I've already introduced my contrast here with the help of but. So but comes when we have already talked about something, right? So of course, after this, it cannot come that for how arguments are considered for theoretical purposes. So fourth also will not be the answer. Now, there was an interesting thing that happened for many students in this year's CAT. Options were jumbled up. So blank number 1 was not always option 1. Blank number 2 was not always option 2. Blank number 3 was not always option 3. Blank number 4 was not always option 4. And this is exactly what you are also seeing here in the video. So my answer is blank 3, but that blank 3 is coming in second option. So my answer will be option 2. It would be better if, we had written blank 3 here instead of option 3, but yeah. All right, the main sentence is, beyond undermining the monopoly of the state on the use of force, armed conflict also creates an environment that can enable organized crime to prosper. Okay. There is one thing that I'm talking about here, which is armed conflict, and it also creates an environment that enables organized crime to prosper. That means I must talk about armed conflict. I must talk about what armed conflict does. Only then I can use the word also, that it also does this thing. Which means I have to have a significant discussion on armed conflict, maybe the introduction of state on the use of force, the things that armed conflict is leading to, and then an also sentence will come, which is given in my main sentence. Now let's look at the paragraph. Again, it cannot start with the very first one, because for armed conflict to also create something, it must have created already something and must have been introduced. Linkages between illicit arms, organized crime, and armed conflict can reinforce one another while also escalating and prolonging violence and eroding governance. Fine. Then there is a gap. Financial gains from crime can lengthen or intensify armed conflicts by creating revenue streams for non-state armed groups. I'm again talking about how they reinforce each other while they also escalate and prolong violence. So my sentence after blank number 2 is extending on that idea only, that financial gains from crime can lengthen or intensify these conflicts. So there is no gap in blank 2. That should not be my answer. We have already identified that it cannot start with the first one. So that also was not my answer. Let's read the sentence after blank 3. In this context. In what context? Anyways, in this context, when hostilities cease and parties to a conflict move towards a peaceful resolution, the widespread availability of surplus arms and ammunition can contribute to a situation of criminalized peace that obstructs sustainable peace-building efforts. Now, this is very interesting. The biggest hint that you are getting in this sentence is something is leading to criminalized peace. What do we mean by criminalized peace? That criminalized peace is happening in the context which is mentioned in my sentence, that armed conflict also creates an environment which enables organized crime to prosper. If the crime is organized, so it is a criminalized peace. For example, gang wars are not happening because they have distributed already that this portion of the city will be taken care of by one gang and this portion of the city will be taken care of by, say, another gang. And because organized crime has happened, there is a criminalized peace. Now, this is going to obstruct the actual peace-building effort. So it makes sense that I talk about the context as to what is leading to criminalized peace before introducing criminalized peace. That's why it is better that my main sentence should come in third one and not the fourth one. Here also you will see the options are jumbled up. So my answer is still option 2, but the blank is 3. 5 sentences are given. We have to identify the odd sentence. Very easy. Let's identify the specific topics that are being dealt with in each of these sentences. First sentence, Boa Senior, who lived through 2004 tsunami, was the last native of the island chain who was fluent in Bo. I'm talking about death of a person called Boa Senior, and he was the last native of those islands that spoke a particular language called Bo. Second, the indigenous population has been steadily collapsing since the island chain was colonized by British settlers in 1858 and used for most of the following 100 years as a penal colony. Here I am talking about occupation of an island by the British in 1858. Maybe it's the same island, but okay, let's see what is the broader topic that we are talking about here. Third, taking its name from the now extinct tribe, Bo is one of the 10 great Andamanese languages, which are thought to date back to pre-Neolithic human settlements. This is again talking about Bo language, the history of it. It dates back to so many years and so on. Then, the last speaker of an ancient tribal language has died in Andaman Islands, breaking a 65,000-year link to the world's oldest cultures. Definitely, it connects with one. It is also talking about that person who died, Boa Senior, and it was the last connect to this language because this was the last speaker of that language. So here again, I'm talking about Bo language. And finally, in the fifth one, again, I'm talking about Bo language, that the language has been closely studied by researchers. Boa Senior spent few years of her life unable to converse with anyone in her mother tongue. So the passage, broadly, is about the extinction of Bo language as the last speaker died. Option number 2 is talking about colonization of the island, which is not part of the discussion. So this is the odd one out. Interesting, right? Let's look at this. Let's identify the dominant theme in all these sentences and see which one doesn't fit the bill. First one. Although hard skills have traditionally ruled the roost, some companies are moving away from choosing prospective hires based on technical abilities alone. They are moving away from it. So this particular option talks about the reducing importance of hard skills among recruiters. Second, companies are shaking off old definition of an ideal candidate and ditching the idea of looking for the singularly perfect candidate altogether. This one talks about what's the definition, or I would say what's the old definition of an ideal candidate. Third, now some job descriptions are frequently asking for candidates to demonstrate soft skills, such as leadership or teamwork. This is talking about growing importance of soft skills. Now it should not be a problem to think about that maybe the passage is about a contrast between hard skills and soft skills. But let's still read further. That's not to say that practical know-how is no longer required. Some jobs still call for highly specific expertise. So this talks about hard skills versus soft skills. And we are saying that, yeah, some jobs require hard skills, but maybe something else is also there. The move towards prioritizing soft skills is a natural response to 3 years of pandemic, says a senior recruiter. So this also talks about hard skills versus soft skills. Now it is easy. The passage is about relative standing of hard skills and soft skills, as in hard skills are declining and soft skills are gaining traction. Sentence 2 talks about what is the definition of an ideal candidate. What is the old definition of it? Which is not necessarily a core discussion of hard skills and soft skills, and hence that should be my answer. 4 sentences are given below. We have to rearrange them in a perfect order. Step number 1 is identify starter or a follower. Step number 2, create mandatory sequences. And step number 3, arrange and verify. Veena Sahajwala, a material scientist at the University of New South Wales, believes that there is a new way of solving this problem. Which problem? So it's a follower. Her vision is for automated drones and robots to pick out components. Her vision. So Veena's vision. So this also should be a follower, and at least I know that Veena should be introduced first. Then I'm going to refer Veena with the help of pronouns. So 2 will come after 1. Whether 2 will come immediately after 1 or not, I don't know. But 2 will definitely come after 1. Third, e-waste contains huge quantities of valuable metals, ceramics, and plastics that could be salvaged and recycled, although currently not enough of it. This seems to be the introduction. How to better salvage or better recycle the valuables from e-waste. So ideally, it should start with 3. If it should start with 3, then 3 should come, and then 1 and 2 will come. She plans to build micro factories that can tease apart the tangle of material in mobile phones, computers, and other e-waste. Now, this is talking about a process of how you can recycle things. She is Veena, right? Now, it connects with 2 because this talks about the broader plan. 2 says her vision is for automated drones to pick up the components, put them in small furnace, melt them at specific temperatures to extract metals. 4 talks about what she plans in a very broad manner. So first you talk about a broad plan, then you go into the specifics of it. So 4, 2 is a sequence. Now I know that 4 should come before 2. So ideally the answer should be 3, 1, 4, 2. But we can also confirm that with another hint. Sentence 4 talks about a new way, and the need of a new way is introduced in 1. So first you say that there is a new way, and then you talk about the new way. That means 4 will come after 1. So 1, 4 is a sequence, 4, 2 is a sequence. So I know that my final sequence will be 3, 1, 4, 2. Very easy question. Okay, let's identify starter and follower, and then mandatory pairs, and then we'll arrange and verify. Centuries later, formal learning is still mostly based on reading, even with the widespread use of other possible education affecting technologies such as film, radio, and TV. Centuries later. What happened? So what happened, before that? Another thing is, author says, formal learning is still based on this thing. That means already you must have talked about formal learning, and then you are extending that idea using the word still. So this is definitely a follower. And when I say follower, it should come pretty late because it seems sort of a concluding remark. Sort of a concluding remark that you have talked about that centuries later, things are still happening the way they used to happen. Right? Second, one of the immediate and recognizable impacts of the printing press was on how people learned. In the scribble culture, it primarily involved listening to, so memorization was paramount. So this is discussing one of the impacts of printing press. Definitely, it is part of a narrative. You should introduce printing press, and then you can talk about the specifics of printing press. This is also a follower. Now, between 2 and 1, I know that 1 will come later on, because here you are talking about the impact of something, and then you are saying that things are still the same way. So 2, 1, whether 1 will come immediately after 2 or not, I don't know. But 2 will come before 1. That is something I can figure out. Third, the transformation of learners from listeners to readers was a complex social and cultural phenomenon. And it was not until the industrial era that the concept of universal literacy took root. Here, I'm introducing the topic of transformation of learners, how it happens, and what is the impact of industrial era on that transformation of learners. So if 3 is the introductory one, then 3 to 1 becomes my sequence so far. Then author says, the printing press shifted the learning process as listening and memorization gradually gave way to reading, and learning no longer required the presence of a mentor. It could be done privately. This introduces printing press, first of all. So it should connect with 2, which talks about benefits of printing press. So 2 will come after 4. It also connects with 3 because it is an example of industrial era. So this will come after 3. So 4 should come before 2, or 2 should come after 4. And 4 should come after 3. What will be my sequence? First 3, then 4, then after 4, 2, and then after 2, 1. 3, 4, 2, 1. This was slightly tricky as compared to the previous question, but still doable. But if you were spending more time on it, if you were thinking that you were confused between 2 options, generally what happens that people get confused between 2 and 3 as the starter one. If that also happened as the case with you, it was desirable that you leave this question unattempted, or you quickly just write something down in a minute and go away, because it's a TETA question. All right. 4 alternate summaries are given. Let's read this passage, understand the key points here, and then we are going to see in what option those key points are properly reflected and the argument is well presented. Gradually, life for the island's birds is improving. Antarctic prions, white-headed petrels, which also nest in burrows, had managed to cling on in some sites while pests were on the island. Their numbers are now increasing. It's fantastic and so exciting. As the birds return to breed, they also poo. So first thing is that absence of pests has allowed for revival of bird species. Second thing, you are saying that they also poo. They add nutrients to soil, which eventually helps plants grow back stronger. So it also talks about a feedback loop, that the activities of these birds that return to breed creates a positive impact. And then finally, author also, goes on to explain that orchids and tiny herbs that had been protected by fencing have started turning up all over the place. That means plants are also coming back. So basically, it's the entire landscape that is transforming, birds, plants, everything. Let's look at the options now. Flowering plants, herbs, and birds are now being protected on this wonderful Antarctic island. Very good option, very confusing one also, because we think that this should be the answer. But this summary is very general and it doesn't capture key elements of the passage. So it focuses on the protection of, these birds and all that stuff, but it misses the impact of pests. And it also doesn't talk about the entire transformation of the ecosystem. You're just saying that flowering plants, herbs, birds are being protected. How? What is leading to that? We don't know, but it is given in the passage, no? That they were available, before pests also, but then there is an impact of lack of pests. So 1 is not the answer. Let's talk about second. There is a huge positive transformation, okay, of the ecosystem of the island, when brought under environmental protection. What do you mean by environmental protection? Nothing like that has been mentioned. Environmental protection can take up n number of ideas. Here I am being very specific about pests. That in the absence of pests, now transformation is happening. So 2 is also not going to be my good summary. There is an increasing number of predatory birds and plants on island despite the presence of pests, which is a positive development. This is inaccurate. It contradicts the information mentioned in the passage. Passage emphasizes the positive impact of the absence of pests. Here you are saying that despite the presence of pests. So not the answer. In the absence of pests, life on the island is now protected and there has been a revival of a variety of bird and plants. Absolutely correct. That is what my answer is. Now, sometimes students get this idea that, we are not able to exactly find out the absence of pests. Then I would want you to read this sentence number 1 once again. Gradually, the life is improving. These birds, which also nest in burrows, had managed to cling on in some sites while pests were on island. So while pests were on island, they managed to cling on in some sites. But gradually now the life is improving. That means now it is fair to point out that when pests are not here, then this transformation is happening. They were managed to cling on to some sites, but now if they're everywhere, that means these things are not there. So this was a tricky thing to find out from the given passage, that it is the absence of pests which is causing the life on the island to thrive. The weight of society's expectations is hardly a new phenomenon, but it has become particularly draining over recent decades, perhaps because expectations themselves are so multifarious and contradictory. So one thing is that society's expectations regarding perfectionism have become draining because of the contradictory and multifarious nature of expectations. Then author says perfectionism of 1950s was rooted in the norms of mass culture. What was perfectionism of 1950? That we should conform to the standards of society. What is the perfection of today? By contrast, feel an obligation to stand out. The perfectionism of today is that not conform to values, but stand out. So these are 3 important things, that society's expectations, is becoming draining. Then there is a contrast of what perfectionism stood for earlier and what it stands for now. Let's see which option captures these ideas in the most proper manner. First, desire to attract attention is so deep-rooted in individual consciousness that people are willing to go any lengths to achieve it. No. The option is actually overstating the claim by suggesting that people are willing to go to any lengths. It is not mentioned in passage. Passage definitely discusses the pressure to stand out in the attention economy, but it doesn't necessarily imply extreme measures. So this is not a good summary. Also, it doesn't really talk about that, I would say, the spectrum, that what perfectionism stood earlier and what it stands for now. So one is gone. Second, the pressure to appear perfect has been the cause of tension and conflict because the idea itself has been in state of flux and hard to define. This option captures the idea that evolving nature of perfectionism has led to tension and conflict, but it does not mention the shift from conformism to non-conformism. What used to happen in 1950s and what happens now? What is the definition of perfectionism earlier and what is the definition of perfectionism now? And that's a very important part of the passage. So this is incomplete. So not my summary. Third, though long-standing, the pressure to appear perfect and thereby attract attention has evolved over time from one of conformism to one of non-conformism. Bang on! It talks about the historical shift in the nature of perfectionism from conforming to societal norms and to the new idea that we need to stand out in the attention economy. And it's a long-standing thing, being a perfectionist. So third is definitely correct. Let's talk about fourth. The image of perfectionism is reflected in and perpetuated by the media, and people do their best to adhere to these ideals. This option focuses on the role of media and adherence to idols. Not exactly something that we are talking about. Also, it is not again talking about the shift from conformism to non-conformism. So this also is wrong answer. Hence, my answer is 3.